Oh, now our mics are on. Hello, everyone.
Good
Welcome
morning.
to Sunrise Extra on your Thursday. You were saying?
Well, I like when Director Brian lets us know that we're on. He says, "You're hot." And that always makes me feel good about myself.
Oh, my gosh. Is there internet in this
You're
building?
incorrigible.
There we are.
What you looking for?
Yeah,
Oh, I
Are you
don't
looking for content? Something to talk about?
look for internet.
Looking for the stream
Oh,
people.
here. Okay. Hi. Christine, I'm going to have you start us off because we are talking about a topic that you kind of delved into this morning. It was an Oregonian report on a survey they did about school kids, right? And how they feel about going to school?
Right, so we got the actual reports from Portland Public Schools.
Oh.
The survey was done in the 2018-2019 school year, and this is something I think they do every year, trying to gauge kind of the feelings of their students, staff, and parents. And I mean, it made some pretty grim findings, I think. I mean, especially when it comes to students, some who didn't feel like they mattered at all, some who didn't have good relationships with their teachers, just kind of things like that. I mean, and I don't know if my mic is my mic working, guys?
I think so. I hear you.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So basically they looked at more than 9,000 kids. From middle and high school, 85% said they weren't excited about class, really. 84% said they felt somewhat, slightly, not really connected to the adults in their schools. And 66% felt like they mattered somewhat, a little bit, maybe not at all. And when you compare our numbers to the numbers nationally, not so great because we're ranking in the 10th percentile. So, I mean, and those facts that we just put up on the screen, just a few of the questions asked. I mean, there were a lot of questions asked.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but have they done this survey before? Is this a normal?
I think they have. It's called like the School's Success Survey.
I
And
wonder where this ranks.
Yeah, in all
know,
those answers.
are
Because the
we-
first
are
thing
they
that we
more
talked
depressed?
about during the show is like, well, kids in general, not always thrilled to go to school, but they have to. But I wonder if this is just kind of a microcosm of the bigger issue that we're seeing with this generation of feeling more isolated because of technology and a higher level of anxiety and more depression and, you know, the suicide rates among young people. I wonder if somehow that is influencing all of that. I would be interested to hear the answer to the question you
Yeah,
asked.
where we kind of rank
Yeah.
now compared to years past.
Yeah, I didn't find a whole lot of it to be too surprising.
Yeah, you were like,
right,
"This news?"
yeah.
But only because I think the one that jumped out to me was 85% of the students said they were either not excited or only somewhat excited about going to school. And I thought to myself, well, geez, the only other
most
category would
kids.
be very excited, I guess. And I don't expect
Right.
many
I
kids
would
to be
think-
very excited about going to
Yeah,
school.
that was a
With you, the
lower
word
percentage.
Somewhat excited. I'm like, isn't that the category every kid's always been in?
Yeah,
Somewhat.
there
Not
are
every
some.
kid,
You know, there's a few
but
that
lot
go,
of
oh,
them.
my, you know, once in a while a parent will tell me my child really likes going to school, and I think you have a rare child. You know, and I'm hoping my kids do well in school, but I don't expect them to get excited about it every day. It'd be nice, right? That's ideal.
But
But
we
it's
all
not
thought the most
realistic.
important like crux of this was how if kids felt like valued,
Right.
You know,
Right,
wasn't that
as if
part
they
of-
mattered, yeah. I mean, there are a lot of pages and a lot of questions that were asked in this survey. But yeah, I mean, the fact that 66% felt like they mattered somewhat, a little bit, some not at all. I mean, that's a pretty large percentage that don't feel like they really matter, you know?
People are weighing in on what you're saying. So Polly Blamont says, I think it is because of the new technology. We went to school with no phones.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know there are some rules when it comes to phone use in like high schools and stuff. You know, Lincoln, I know when I went over there recently, they have a rule where you're not allowed to have your phones out at all in class.
Yeah.
A lot of them do.
I think that's becoming the norm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so.
It's the norm at my child's school.
And then
Yeah.
Patricia Lopez says, I guess she was talking about engaged until about 5th grade. I became a problem child after. I think it was because I got bored.
Interesting. She got bored.
JR Raven on our YouTube channel. Hi, JR. Good morning. She says, it seems like kids have felt this way for decades. I didn't like school, and most of my classmates didn't either. She graduated from Centennial in 1995, so maybe things have changed.
I do think there's a danger in this. I'm just going to speak like an oldster because the older I get, I'm turning into more of an oldster.
Be the old person you are.
Yeah, I'll be the old person I am.
Embrace
and,
that.
You know, what's one issue that we as a newsroom have highlighted in our schools? In some cases, we've highlighted the lack of of discipline, and the fact that society has basically said, nope, you can't take kids to the principal's office anymore and spank them, for example, or you can't discipline kids the way they used to be disciplined in school. And speaking as a father, my daughter has one class in school where discipline, according to her, is a real problem, and it prohibits her from being able to, according to her, to learn in class, because the kids are unruly, and we've made it very difficult for parents, for teachers, it seems like, to get a handle on their classroom. And then that makes me think of the people that say, what do kids want from a very young age? They want boundaries. They want discipline. Kids do better in those settings. And as a society, we've kind of, seems like we've taken that setting away. And to me, part of this study speaks to that issue.
Interesting.
School should be sort of a microcosm of what the real world is going to be like, right? So your first experience into some settings that maybe you're not happy with everything that happens in school, but that's the way it's going to be when you get to your workplace too. So I was thinking like, hey, in work, you're going to work with people, you're going to have bosses that you don't always like. If you're lucky, you love your boss, right? You go, oh my gosh, you know what I love about my job? My boss is great.
I love my boss.
Maybe you have a school teacher like that. And those are rare. Those are fantastic when you get them. But sometimes, kids, you're going to have teachers that you don't connect with. And now the challenge is to do your best despite that lack of connection. I don't think you can use that as an excuse. For, maybe that's why you don't do as well in one class as the other, but you got to find a way on your own, because when you get to work, there's going to be people that you're going to have to learn to work with. There's going to be bosses that you're going to have to learn to deal with and work around. And also the idea of being excited. Guess what? This is a pretty cool job, but I do not wake up excited to come to work every day. I don't.
No, nobody.
Yeah, and
I wish I had off.
Right.
So you're not going to be excited about going to school every day.
Right, and
it's just not realistic.
Jeff Lucas on our Facebook stream said excited was the wrong word to use.
Right.
I think
I agree.
that's,
Good
I mean,
point.
that's a good point.
Here's
for
He
sure.
said he was excited to be with his friends and to play basketball classes. We're not that excited.
Yeah.
I get
So the
that.
other day we took a tour of like a little preschool daycare to look at for sending our daughter, and then sometime in the next year. And as they're showing us, all the little classrooms and talking about, how they run things, I asked the question, okay, what happens, because she's been at home this whole time, what happens when, a kid pushes somebody else down, or somebody needs to be, someone's pinching or pulling or throwing things or whatever, like how do you guys treat these situations or like intervene? And their kind of philosophy was, of course we stop it and kind of distract and turn the kid away. But they said, we don't use the word no, and we don't use the word stop.
What?
Because according to, she said, the more that kids hear that in their development, it, stops down their development or something like that. And so they'll switch it to something like positive. They'll say, hey, if you keep doing this, you're hurting your friend, or you're like it's bad in some way. But they'll say something else, another behavior and they'll make it positive instead of saying no. And in my mind, I was like, you don't tell them no or stop. What's going to happen, when they get to any other situation?
They're gonna think mommy's horrible. Mommy's always saying
and then
no.
I'm just like, is this normal? I mean, that's the first ever tour of a daycare or preschool that we've taken. We have some more lined up. But I'm like, is this the norm nowadays of like, no, we don't tell our little children no anymore?
I've heard child psychologists say, and again, this is with older kids, I don't know about preschool, but I would assume that it would start that that's your when they use bad and good, they don't say you're bad.
Your behavior is.
The action. Some people really try and split that.
Right.
Because you start to internalize that, perhaps. But you're right. I mean, I haven't heard that before.
But I understand what they're saying. I understand what they're
I get it, like let's be positive, why don't we do this? And this is a great activity instead of no, always hearing no, no, no.
Right.
But I mean, my gosh, in some instances, you need to be told stop.
Right, and I don't think you can just blanket say never.
Right. But
it's
really
building
kind of
empathy,
stuck out to me,
especially if
like-
you're throwing the light on how your actions affect somebody else.
Yeah, speaking of, disrespectful behavior and trying to quell that, trying to address it, this survey actually addressed it too. It asked the question, how often are people disrespectful to others at your school? So students being disrespectful maybe to other students, and almost half, like 46%, said frequently and almost always. If you added in the sometimes, it definitely went into the majority of students that said that there was a lot of disrespectful behavior between students even. So I don't know, what's encouraging that? Has there always been just straight up disrespectful behavior? I mean, I don't remember.
Probably.
I mean,
Yes.
Natasha,
Yes.
our daughter, would tell me a lot of instances about the students being blatantly disrespectful to the teachers themselves.
Yeah.
And again, we've done stories on this where
Yes.
teachers actually felt threatened for their safety because of the behavior of the students in their classrooms.
Right.
Right.
We have a contributor. I feel like I do believe it is a she, but she goes by MBB. I would love to know what MBB stands for, but she's been contributing almost daily for a couple of weeks now. She says she hated it talking about school. She actually says here, MBB does, that one teacher picked on her. She actually took video of this teacher picking on her, showed it to her parents, and that was enough for her parents to remove her from that school. In fact, she said her parents at that point removed all the kids from the school and they homeschooled MBB and her siblings. MBB says she never regretted the homeschooling, and this was all because of a hearing issue that she has. And I apologize if this whole time, MBB, you are a he, but I feel like it's a she. Regardless, I appreciate the feedback because, there's another debate about, the benefits, and we're seeing more and more now kids being homeschooled. I was just going through the Instagram feed and saw someone I know who I had no idea was homeschooling the kids, and there they were. I'm like, hey, how did they go to the Oregon Coast yesterday? The kids had school, and then I look further, I'm like, oh, she's homeschooling the kids now.
Yeah, I mean, props to the people who can do it. I don't think I was smart enough to homeschool my kids, but I mean, just the dynamic of parent, child, and then you add in teacher. I don't think that would have worked at our house, but if it does for you, I love the fact that people are talking about what makes them engage in school. And Erica Daniels says, I went to school for one thing, choir. I just wanted to sing. So when you give them something to hook into, for some people it's sports, for her it was choir. That's huge.
Yeah.
Jenny Carlson, one of our other
Jenny.
woohoo loyalists, said loved school in the 80s. And leaders are celebrating excellent tests, which leave 80% of the students out of it.
Hey, I want to talk to our YouTube followers. I am watching you, a new you. I hear you. She says they're not reading our comments on YouTube. I am. I have it up now. You guys told me about it.
What are they saying?
I love it. Okay, so she says, my child is struggling as a freshman. She's definitely becoming sad daily now. If I could shield her from it all, I would. I've even considered the extreme way of living, like in an RV and homeschooling her. While seeing the views. Kids have a lot of social anxiety these days. She's not used to it. Something changed. School is just much more tough on kids today. It was always rough, but I can see how some feel like they don't matter.
What is her
That's
name?
so sad.
It just says a new you.
A new you.
are
Let me just share this because my oldest had some learning differences and whatnot when he was in high school, and we ended up pulling him out of public school to find a more amenable environment for him. And it wasn't, I mean, he had some great teachers, but I remember going into his high school here in Portland and talking to the counselor, and she had absolutely no answers about anything. And as I left her office, she said, will you let me know what you find out when you find other places?
Wow.
So a lot of parents are out there, and I mean, I am pretty much a pit bull when it comes to my kids. Like, thank God I've got resources and I have the wherewithal that I can take time to do a deep dive, but not everybody does. And if your kid is struggling and you can't afford this astronomical tuition to put them into private school, it is the worst feeling on the planet. You are grieving, your family is in upheaval. And the public schools do a lot of amazing things, but for the most part they're teaching right here down the middle because that's what they have to do. That's where most kids are. So if you have one that's struggling, it's hard. They can only do so much. I had the other experience too. When somebody said they were bored, my youngest was that way. In middle school it was like, this is so boring.
Yeah, it's not that they're not capable. It's that they're really capable and they're just bored.
Yeah.
And this survey actually found it wasn't all bad. 85% of students said they felt like their teachers were respectful to them. On the topic of anxiety, social anxiety, and safety and stuff, kids. Surprisingly, because we talk a lot about online bullying, but surprisingly it found that a lot of kids felt that they were not at all likely or just slightly likely to be bullied online. So maybe all the talk that we've had about it over the last few years, maybe that's made a difference. Another point of agreement and positivity, I think, is that parents, staff, and students generally had positive responses about school safety, which was also something I found interesting because of obviously the mass shootings that have occurred in the recent years.
Did we
Feeling
share
better about that. I
Katie
like that.
McCoy's comments earlier about class sizes? It was way early in the stream here, but Katie brings up a good point. I do think class size does play a big factor, especially in this idea of not feeling valued. She says that her kids are sometimes lost in the crowd. She says that it made a massive difference, Katie says, when she moved her son from a class of 26 in a public school to a class of 14 in a private school. And like you were saying, Brenda, that is not an option for everyone. Sometimes you don't have the means to put your child in this class where there's going to be far fewer kids, but geez, that's going to make the difference, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you're all going
it
to feel more
helps.
valued when you're one of a few versus one of many.
Right, many.
And ultimately, you know, kids will have that decision. A lot of them when they leave high school. I always thought like big college, I want to go big. You know, my school had 30,000 students in it and never thought twice of it. But some kids, that's why they choose those smaller schools, right?
Yeah,
Because they
more
don't want to be that face in the crowd.
Yeah. Do you want to pivot to our second topic? Because you were.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, what's the second topic?
Yeah, what's the second topic?
What is
Do you
it?
have that article? I couldn't even finish it. I was so hot about it.
So Illinois, Jeff Sessions was doing a speech on campus to a crowd, and there was protests going on outside, right?
Right, student protests.
Not here, outside.
Yeah.
It sounds like it there.
And the campus journalists, the newspaper was covering Sessions and covering the student protesters. And the student protesters were like, you know, you're taking my picture, you're offending me. I guess at one point an officer had a girl on the ground arresting her, and the girl was tweeting the photographer on the school paper saying, you know what, you're taking this picture of me, you're like over me, you're shooting down at me, you're invading my space. Mind you, this was in a public space. It wasn't private. He wasn't using a telephoto lens. This was out there.
So it's legal
And,
to take
of course it
pictures.
is.
Yeah.
And then the school and the paper ended up apologizing for coverage of Sessions.
Saying it was a traumatic to take her photo and use it in a news story covering the protest.
Yes.
And you were
and
like,
the
I can't even read
photographer,
this.
kid is like, you know, I didn't mean to hurt anybody, and is my coverage, and journalists across the country are just aghast, as you would be. I mean, and I texted Nina a link to the New York Times article that I read it in, and I said, what is happening to journalism? What the hell is happening? If you're in a public space,
Right.
they're covering something. I want to know what happened.
You're on a public sidewalk. You are publicly protesting something.
You're
but
putting yourself out
cannot
there,
be
yeah.
upset if your picture is taken.
Isn't that funny? They're like
or video is
exercising
taken.
their freedom to
Right?
protest, their freedom of speech, but they're going to deny the freedom of press.
Exactly. Yeah, we have a bunch of comments
person's
that we
tweeting
pulled
or
that
not?
are
Is
making
the
the
one
rounds
denying it?
online.
Not
So
during.
Matt Sebastian,
was during.
the editors of Northwestern's student newspaper, are apologizing for doing journalism. This is deeply embarrassing.
Right.
Next one, Jill says, sorry, but this is really, really embarrassing to see from the newspaper of Northwestern, which has a excellent
Journalism.
journalistic,
Yeah.
yes. In appalling ignorance of the basics of news gathering, a Northwestern student newspaper apologizes for taking photos of students protesting Jeff Sessions and for using the student directory to text students to ask if they wanted to be interviewed.
Well, you know, the same
Common
thing happened
practice.
at my alma mater some years back. University of Missouri had
I'll look this up.
demonstrations going on, and one of the demonstrators was a University of Missouri journalism professor who, if I remember the story correctly, went off the rails basically calling out journalists from covering it as well. And we're
Yeah.
like, well, you're a journalism professor.
Right.
Who was...
Are they not doing what they're supposed to do?
So, holy cow.
So here is the young woman who was photographed. Colin is the photographer. This is what she tweeted him. Colin, please, can we stop this trauma porn? I was on the ground being shoved and pushed hard by the police. You don't have to intervene, but you also didn't have to put a camera in front of me top down.
That's documenting, you know,
What's happening?
current events.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, I get her feelings on it, but at the same time, you know, she made the decision to be out there, right? I mean, and when you're making the decision to be out there in the public sphere, and honestly, as a reporter who goes out all the time by myself to shoot interviews and things, I often get this. Like, you know, I mean, I've gotten it multiple times where people are like, you're not allowed to shoot. I respectfully
am.
say,
Yes.
I'm on a public sidewalk and I am. You know, if you have concerns, I mean, I'll listen to concerns. You know, if somebody is concerned for their well-being or don't want their photo
that into
taken,
account, yeah.
I will take that into account. But I mean, when you're out there, just so everyone knows and is clear on this, if you're in a public space where anyone can see you, a camera can roll, and it's legal.
Yep.
And it's just fine.
I've had people shout at me on the
Yeah.
street, you know, and they don't know that that is allowed. Or at these, you know, I mean, the protests that we have in downtown Portland where people wear masks, you know, so they think they can't be identified by the police or us or whatever. And they'll yell at us, you know, don't take my picture. Well, sorry, this is a huge event that's blocking our streets.
Yes.
And
I will say this.
You're
in defense
walking in the middle of the
non-journalists,
street. Yes.
People that are in the story, that I'll say, even though something may be totally legal, totally allowable, that doesn't always make it the right thing to do.
Right.
In this case, I think it was completely right. But there's other cases where you may see someone that you know was involved in a story where they lost a loved one, perhaps. You have every right to approach that person as they're on the street with your camera rolling and ask them about it. But you don't do that necessarily because you don't.
Right.
You know,
And
it's not the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't make it right just because it's legal.
Yeah.
Getting back to what we're talking about in this case, I thought the idea of protesting was to bring attention to the subject that you're passionate about. So they're bringing attention to it. They're getting the attention I would assume they want, and then they're mad that there was coverage of the
But
event.
as we said,
Very
that
odd.
happens here in Portland. Our news crews has encountered the protesters basically saying, get out of here, you don't have the right to be here too. And to your point, don't you want coverage of your protest?
Yeah. On YouTube, J.R. Raven says, don't they now teach journalists to be more aggressive?
I don't know
That's
about
not
that.
true, no.
I don't think so.
No.
No, I mean, you've got the TMZs and, you know, of the world
Yeah, but
and
no one's
Vice
teaching that.
Media
Someone's coming up with
and
that idea on their
all
own.
that kind of stuff. She also says on the other side, people should take responsibility for their own actions instead of saying it's someone else's fault, like journalists, teachers, whoever.
Journalism,
Jenny-
like many things, ain't what it used to be. I mean, is that safe to
It
say?
isn't. I think that there's so many different outlets,
Right.
and a lot of it is opinion. And in my opinion,
Yeah.
that is not.
A lot more things
Yeah.
follow
That's
under the
editorial.
umbrella of journalism than
Yeah,
used to.
right.
Did we have the photo that they were talking about, producer Celeste? No, okay.
By the way, Jenny Carlson says, what point is it throwing gas on a fire? What point is it inciting more violence? I think, assumably, when you're taking a photo of the girl on the ground or, you know, in public or whatnot, I think there's a fine line. I mean, you don't want to incite more violence or throw gas on the fire, but you also want to accurately portray what is happening, you know? And I think there is a fine line when it comes to that, but it is necessary sometimes to show what is happening to convey the gravity.
Exactly.
Right. That's a good
well
last
said.
word.
Yeah. So you were very frustrated by that. Yeah, it is. It is very frustrating. Okay, 7:25 on the dot. Have a wonderful Thursday. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.